committee that tourist taxes are common across Europe, and so I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that view that visitors' levies and tourist taxes are commonplace and don't seem to deter tourists from visiting popular destinations. And David.
Yes, that point of view is often put, and there's some truth in it, but a couple of points. One, here in Scotland and the UK, we have very high, compared with our competitors, levels of tourist taxes. That's taxes on anything tourists pay, by which I mean VAT on accommodation, which is the highest of all our competitors, airport departure taxes, alcohol taxes, and business rates and other things. And the World Economic Forum rated the UK 140th out of 140 countries in 2019 on tourism price competitiveness. So we're already very highly taxed as a sector. That's one point. The other point is that the other countries that have tourist taxes, and again, all their other taxes are lower than ours, they, in most cases, are allowed to have their room price and then simply say at the desk, by the way, it's another €3 or whatever, payable locally. That's not legal here because we have to put any mandatory fees in the price unless the law is going to be changed on that. So, therefore, we would have to add that price into our room price, which is very competitive. And that's another point I'd like to make later, if you give me more time, in terms of how competitive tourism is. It's very transparent. People book through online travel agencies and they'll book a room of £99 rather than a room of £100. So the idea that it's not that £3 or £2 or £5 won't be noticed is not correct in that context.
Just before I bring you in, Fiona, could you just come? I just wanted to. So I didn't quite catch what you were saying about the the legal piece, that it's not legal in this country. Could you just say that again or go over it again?
Yeah, and I don't remember the name of the legislation, but in this country we're not allowed to exclude anything that is mandatory in the price. So you can't, if you have a product that costs £100 and there's a mandatory extra fee of £2 that somebody can't avoid, legally you have to quote £102 for that product. And that includes travel.
Right, so we can't separate it out.
Can't separate it out unless fundamental legislation's changed.
Okay.
One of my colleagues may remember the name of the bill. I think it's in our submission, but I can't remember the name of the legislation offhand. Okay,
thanks for that. Fiona.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I absolutely concur with David that this proposed levy risks the competitiveness of the Scottish tourism industry, and it also ignores the fact that tourists already make a substantial contribution to our economy. It is absolutely true that lots of European markets have got levies in place, but they do not have our level of VAT. A new levy in Scotland would be an addition to VAT, whereas in 25 of the EU countries, they have a discounted VAT rate for tourism, so we are automatically being disadvantaged. And the financial memorandum for this particular bill doesn't estimate the financial impact of businesses if VAT is applied to the levy, and that urgently needs to be revisited. This is going to have a detrimental impact on small accommodation providers specifically because it may well push them into the VAT threshold that they have not met before. That is a significant problem for those small businesses. And a recent PwC report, which is called The Impact of Taxes on the Competitiveness of European Tourism, which I can happily share with you later if you don't have that. It was prepared for the European Commission. It found that tourist demand is highly sensitive to changes in price. So £1 in addition as a levy will have a majorly detrimental impact on the visitor spend.
Thanks. Stephen.
Yeah, I would agree with what Fiona and David have said. I think it's not, on its own, any policy is always kind of rational and makes sense, but we have to look at it in the round in terms of both levels of taxation and layers of legislation there. And I think there's a lot to be taken into account, both recent impact as well as long-term impact as well. So we have to look at everything together rather than just one single thing. The other thing I was going to mention was just in the BRIA was just that there's not really much learning from those other countries as well in terms of what the costs of implementation are. There's a little bit in terms of local authority costs, but there's very little there as investigating for the operators what it's cost them and what their experience is around it. And also just generally, it's fine to say other countries have that, but what is the learning from that? What can we take from it? What are the good bits we can take from that? And what are the mistakes? Because there's always mistakes.
Thanks. Stacey.
I would certainly agree with what my fellow panel members have just said there. When we spoke to our members about implementing the tax, the two main things that we heard were that Scotland's already a highly taxed setting for them to operate in, and the VAT point was the one that came up most about being scared about being pushed over into that threshold. And to pick up on Stephen's point there, I think it's also important, what economic context did those countries implement their levies in? We're all very familiar with the current circumstances of our economy, the cost of living crisis. We all know that accommodation providers have not had to seek their challenges in the last 3 years. So I think it's really important to think about that context and what they're dealing with, trying to get back on their feet just now when we think about implementing any new tax or regulation.
Thanks very much. And Ben.
Thanks very much. Just to add to all those points, which I concur as well. When you're considering all those taxes in the round, so not just a visitor levy, which is common in Europe, when you look at all the types of taxation, those destinations with the highest levels of taxation on visitor accommodation, notably Amsterdam and Barcelona, have done so to try to reduce and restrict visitor numbers. Which I think is key, and obviously I don't think that's the policy here. And one side point on that with how people would respond to it and the price sensitivity. I know fellow panel members have done research on Scotland. We actually did some on the Welsh proposals for a levy based on the Welsh government survey of visitors and residents in Wales. And only 50% of people who are likely to go to Wales on holiday said a levy would make no difference to their trip. And then the other half ranged between not being sure, to cutting back, to going on a day trip instead, to going somewhere else. And it all just seems very, very risky for just a few pounds a night. And when we modelled the Welsh government statistics and their survey on a tourism sector spend of £6 billion, a very conservative prediction of the net loss. So after taking the levy, but then the cost in losing those people, the net loss to the Welsh economy would be 385 million. And that's around things like day visitors spending 6 times less than overnight visitors. So it's just that price sensitivity point.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to move on to the next question. Pam, actually, you wanted to come in on a supplementary on this? Yep.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, panel. You have mentioned taxes, their higher taxes, VAT. My question is around, with obviously high costs of doing business in Scotland, which includes areas of business rates as well, regulations on short-term lets and many others, do you think that this extra cost on business is justified?
Fiona.
Thank you. It's a very good question. I think, frankly, this is the absolute last thing that the small accommodation and self-catering sector needs. We've just come through a pandemic. I don't need to explain that. We are being massively squeezed by the cost of living crisis. Recovery remains precarious. Our international visitors are coming back, but our domestic visitors are not. And that is a real problem because historically 70% of our market has been domestic. We obviously are facing significant costs, and those do include those associated with short-term let licensing and planning regulations, which are significant and considerable. Indeed, we could be calling this, we are shrinking our sector and then taxing them on top. And another thing I think that the committee should be cognizant of is how has this been modelled in terms of the BRIA, given that we still don't actually know what the numbers are in terms of short-term let licensing. So, for example, Edinburgh has put a figure against how much they would accrue from the self-catering sector based on 12,000 short-term lets in the city, which was always a flawed number. Only 3,200 have applied. So either the modelling is incorrect, or people are operating under the radar, or people have closed their doors. So until we know those numbers, I think it's really important that we understand how that's going to impact the modelling of a levy.